Okay, good evening, everybody. We have a lot of people who signed up, and hopefully most everybody is starting to come into the Zoom room. We're going to have about an hour for this call tonight. And so I'm going to start quickly here so we can get a lot of material covered and hopefully take some of your questions as well. Just a little bit of housekeeping. The chat is disabled. So if you would like to ask a question, you can look at the Q&A at the bottom of your screen and put a question in there. Otherwise, the chat is disabled. Okay. All righty. My name is Nancy Smith. I'm with Middle Resolution, and we are really pleased to have our speakers on tonight. You can imagine how tough it is to get Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli and Committeewoman Patty Lyman on at the same time. So we grabbed the date and we ran with it. So I really appreciate you getting on, and Claire Bell is 24/7 on election integrity.
Yeah.
So all we have to do is bark and she comes right away. So thank you, everyone. I'll do some bios because we do have the Attorney General and we have our RNC committee woman on us. So if you'll bear with me, I'm gonna go through their bios because I think it's really important to understand the background that they bring to our call. Mr. Ken Cuccinelli earned a mechanical engineering degree from the University of Virginia, a law degree from the Antonin Scalia Law School at George Mason University, and a master's in international commerce and policy from George Mason. Mr. Cuccinelli has been a trial and appellate litigator, including constitutional law, for over 25 years. Additionally, Mr. Cuccinelli served in state government in the Virginia State Senate from 2002 to 2010. And is Virginia's Attorney General from 2010 to 2014, which is where most of us know him. As Virginia's Attorney General, Mr. Cuccinelli led national litigation against Obamacare and other illegal and unconstitutional federal overreaches. He also led Virginia from being one of the worst states in fighting human trafficking to becoming one of the best. And his successful prosecutorial efforts result in record enforcement against gangs, healthcare fraud, and child predators, all while protecting life and constitutional rights. Don't we wish he was back in one of those positions right now? Mr. Cuccinelli also served in the federal government, first as the acting director of the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services. Don't we wish he were in there now? And then as the acting deputy secretary for the Department of Homeland Security. During his tenure, Mr. Cuccinelli was a leading spokesman for the administration on immigration, election security, and homeland security issues. He was responsible for planning and managing a budget of over $50 billion per year, while serving as the chief operating officer for the Department of the Federal Government, responsible for responding to most forms of crises in the United States. He was appointed by the president to serve as an original member of the Corona Task Force upon the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic. Following his time in federal service, Mr. Cuccinelli assumed leadership of the joint Susan B. Anthony List American Principles Project Election Transparency Initiative, in which Mr. Cuccinelli seeks to fend off a federal takeover of state elections, while at the same time advancing election reforms to achieve security, transparency, and accountability in our elections. He continues to be a frequent media contributor on the wide array of subjects in which he is an expert. He and his wife grew up and live in Virginia. They have 7 children, 2 sons-in-laws, and most importantly, 2 grandchildren. And who knows, he may have pictures. In his spare time, he enjoys spending time with his family, reading, shooting, Second Amendment, that always comes up, playing ultimate frisbee, and watching college basketball. So welcome, Attorney General.
Thank you.
Ms. Lyman was born and raised as a native Virginian and a lifelong Republican, overwhelmingly elected National Committee woman by Virginia Republicans in August 2020 in her first ever run for office. Patty and her husband joined the pro-life movement in 1991, holding protest signs outside abortion clinics and hoping to not get arrested. She soon left a successful business career to become a pro-life attorney, going back to the abortion clinics to defend peaceful pro-life protesters as a constitutional attorney at the, at the American Center for Law and Justice. Patty successfully litigated the First Amendment, parental rights, and pro-life cases in state and federal courts and assisted victims of China's forced abortion policy. She also served on the board of the first national network of Black pro-life groups fighting abortion's devastating and disproportionate impact on the Black community. And we're certainly still living through that. After 9/11, Patty moved into immigration law to specialize in asylum for persecuted Christians escaping Islamic countries. Convinced that illegal immigration will result in permanently outvoting Republican values and basic fundamental rights, I think Patty should run for president. Patty speaks frequently to Republican groups about why stopping illegal immigration must be a top priority. She vigorously advocated for Donald Trump in 2016, arguing in particular his genuine pro-life conversion many years before running for president, and most of us saw and witnessed that. He proved her right by being the most actively pro-life president since Roe v. Wade. Patty's Republican Party activism began as a full-time volunteer for the Ollie North Synod campaign, and she's only 35. I say that all the time. During the 2000 Florida recount, as a constitutional attorney, she did multiple media interviews explaining events for the Florida Supreme Court to the U.S. Supreme Court. After the 2016 election, Patty served as a surrogate speaker in Virginia's 2018 gubernatorial and U.S. Senate races and was the credentials point person in 2018 to elect a conservative pro-Trump chairman to Virginia's largest Republican committee. Patty holds a BS in Commerce from the University of Virginia. After working in banking in Miami, Patty earned an MBA in finance in 1984 from the Wharton School at the University of Pennsylvania and received her Juris Doctor in 1997 from Regent University School of Law. She's admitted to the bars of the Virginia Supreme Court, U.S. District Court for the Eastern District of Virginia, U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit, and the U.S. Supreme Court. Patty and her husband of 32 years, Frank, live in Fairfax with their multiple cats and are blessed to enjoy their many godchildren, official and otherwise. So welcome, Patty.
Thank you for such a warm welcome. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you taking the time to be with us. And last but not least, is a dear friend, Dr. Clarabelle Wheeler. She is a senior fellow with the Virginia Institute for Public Policy. She's also a retired surgeon and former member of the Virginia State Board of Elections. Born and raised in Charlottesville, Clarabelle is a graduate of Hollins College and the Medical College of Virginia. Following medical school, she completed her residency at Harvard Combined Orthopedic Surgery in Boston, Massachusetts, and a fellowship at the Curtis National Hand Institute in Baltimore, Maryland. So if you have a hand problem, you know where to go. With more than 4 decades of medicine under her belt, Clarabelle primarily practiced medicine in Fredericksburg with a brief few years in Boise, Idaho. Widely considered one of the foremost experts in Virginia's electoral process and systems, Clarabelle previously served as the vice chair of the Virginia State Board of Elections and a past chairman and secretary of the Albemarle County Electoral Board. She also was previously the Western District Chairman on the Board of Directors on the Legislative Committee for the Virginia Electoral Board Association. She's also served as a poll watcher, election officer, chief election officer, official, and worked with Virginia Voters Alliance. She makes her home in Charlottesville. She has a small farm and local business. She joined the Virginia Institute team in 2021. So thank you. There were some long bios, but we have a really distinguished panel, and all of you have earned the stripes that you wear. So thank you so much for being on tonight. We're going to jump right in with some questions and just a real quick and dirty definition of what ranked choice voting is. Some of the folks on our call tonight may have no knowledge of what ranked choice is, may have a little bit, and may know a lot. So, we're going to I will just do this. I won't do it justice, but in an effort to get going, we're just going to talk very briefly about what ranked choice is. Ranked choice voting is now legal in Virginia. It was passed in the legislature 2 years ago on a bipartisan basis. It is only allowed in local elections for city council or supervisors. Stephen, can you mute? We still have some noise in the background. Anyone who may need to be muted. And so right now it is legal in Virginia. It has not been used very much, but there is a lot of interest in ranked choice voting. And there was certainly an interest this year in the General Assembly to expand ranked choice. There were, I believe, 6 to 7 pieces of legislation, 2 introduced by Republicans, 4 or 5 introduced by Democrats to expand ranked choice voting in Virginia, from boards of supervisors and city council to adding in school boards, as well as congressional and presidential primaries. So there was an effort to move quickly into many of the major races in our state. Ranked choice voting, the quick and dirty version, is that all candidates in a race are put on a single ballot with a ranking method, meaning that a voter walks in, gets a ballot, and has to rank all of the candidates according to their preference at the same time before that ballot is cast. Unlike a convention, unlike another method where there's time to go through and rank the candidates after rounds, there's a single opportunity to cast that ballot and put all of the preferences for the candidate on there. So you may have 5 candidates on the ballot, and you choose your first preference, your second, your third, your fourth, your fifth. As the counts are conducted, as the ballots are tallied, if the first candidate reaches a 50% plus 1, gets to 51%, then they win, the counting is over, and the winners are declared. If they don't reach 50%, then the ballots are retallied. The lowest, the candidate who's lowest on the ballot, having received the least votes, is taken off. Their votes are redistributed to the other candidates, and then the counting begins again on the second round. That continues with the lowest candidate, the lowest vote candidate being peeled off at the bottom, while the candidates at the top continue to go through the rounds until a candidate is chosen. There are all kinds of issues with that make it complicated. But if a voter chooses to not complete the entire ballot, they are at risk of their vote not counting at all, which is certainly one of the issues that Hans von Spakovsky with Heritage Foundation has brought forward, is that the voter is at risk of having their vote not counted at all. So that is just a quick and dirty version. It is more complicated than that, and the execution of it is much more complicated. So let's get into some questions with our guest. One of the arguments, and this is for you, Attorney General, one of the arguments is that ranked choice gives the voters options for candidates who may be less polarizing, perhaps more moderate, that might appeal across to a wider range of voters. So tell us a little bit about thoughts on there's a way to unify and have less strife in our voting if we go through multiple rounds.
Oh, I don't know that it's less strife, but make no mistake, the reason Republicans like Lisa Murkowski support this is because it is intended to weed out conservatives. That's a political impact, and they're happy with that political impact. There are other functional problems with ranked choice voting that are severe of themselves, but make no mistake about it. If you're watching this today and you consider yourself a conservative, ranked choice voting is intended to weed you out and to, when they say more civil, more moderate, they mean less conservative. That's what they mean. And that's why if you look at the funding of the folks behind ranked choice voting, you'll see a lot of the usuals. You'll see some establishment Republicans, and you'll see the left essentially trying to use it to get the right to beat itself. And when I say right, I mean merely right of center. I don't mean conservatives. I mean, they want to pit us all against each other effectively. And we'll get into the problems of ranked choice voting, but make no mistake, when they use all the happy talk of unity and civility, I don't see a lot of civility coming from the left today. And I didn't see a lot of civility when they were trying to burn cities down while I was the deputy at the Department of Homeland Security. So, don't fall for that. And it is literally, Nancy, it's nothing but a narrative. That is not, the unity piece is not what happens with ranked choice voting. The application, whether it's Alaska, Maine, New York City, and we can talk about these examples, Oakland, California, has been more divisive, not more unifying.
Thank you, Patty. You won in a convention, had a great race and won. So tell us a little bit about your convention experience, which was the unassembled convention, okay,
Right.
that Virginia Republicans approved, versus a real ranked choice race in a general election where hundreds of thousands, if not millions of voters go to the polls and are perhaps not quite like us who sort of eat, sleep, and breathe politics and understand what we're doing at a convention. So tell us a little bit about your race and how ranked choice is pretty dramatically different.
Well, I will tell you that my race in particular for National Committee Woman, it only involved 2 candidates. So the ranked choice didn't really come into the picture in my race. However, it did in the chairman's race. For the RPV chairman back in 2020, we had 3 candidates. And I don't think we would even be talking in Virginia about ranked choice voting were it not for what took place during COVID. The whole reason that we got to an unassembled convention is that Governor Northam made it illegal for us to have a convention gathering. The issue with ranked choice voting is if you can't gather in one place for a long period, all we were allowed to do was a drive-through convention, then people had to make all of their choices at one time. And there are lots of limitations to that we can talk about. It was a drive-through thing. They had to make all their choices at once. And then they counted the votes. And no one got 50% on the first round. So the person who got the lowest votes, which was Jack Wilson, our prior RPV chair, he dropped off. And then on the next round, Rich Anderson won. He had more than 50% to win. I think he might have had 60%, which is kind of what I had. But if it weren't for the COVID, we never even would have done that. For decades here in Virginia, Republicans have gathered, usually in Richmond, in a central location. And no matter how many candidates were on the ballot, everyone got to choose between candidates on every ballot. You choose the first time, someone drops off. Now there's a new set of players. You choose from among them. And each time the voter gets to make one distinct, unique decision of those that are still on the ballot at that time. And they make that decision with full information. Not the case with ranked choice voting. And I'll talk in a few minutes about the resolution that we passed at the RNC. The phenomenon that really, really bothers me is after we had to do the unassembled conventions in 20 and then in 2021, this metamorphosis took place on state central committee and among other party leaders here in the state that somehow suddenly, after decades and decades of having conventions, all of a sudden, everyone is too busy to come and go to a convention and stay all day and go through multiple ballots. They're all too busy. Or suddenly, no one can afford to do that. So we can't do that. We can't have a convention. Or suddenly, if you don't make it easy for everybody and their brother to come and choose our nominee, then somehow you have disenfranchised people from choosing our nominee. Well, number one, there is no, constitutionally speaking, there is no franchise for a citizen to have a right to choose a nominee of a private political party. Okay, we can decide who chooses our nominees, and that's a separate issue. But the ranked choice voting, it wasn't really a big deal in our party election. When we had to use it for the gubernatorial election in 2021, when we had 7 candidates, and again, we still had the restrictions about, how long we could gather and where. Although I fought like crazy to be able to at least have our voting location at one location, rather than the 35 that we ended up having, because people can't drive more than 20 miles to vote in a nominating convention suddenly. But I think using the ranked choice voting there really did have an impact. The ballots were counted by hand, and there was a room full of people counting ballots at the Marriott in Richmond. But I think there were some glitches. I think there were some problems. And when you're talking about little fractions of differences in the rankings, when you're talking about that, tiny mistakes can make a really big difference. And I think that I really hope that we don't do it again, even for party elections, because I think it reduces the confidence in the outcome of the elections. And if there's one huge problem that we have in terms of getting our people motivated and committed to save our country with their votes and with their activism, we have to have them confident in what the outcome is. I mean, my bottom line is, and Ken touched on this before, for a conservative or a grassroots person to vote for ranked choice voting is like a turkey voting for Thanksgiving.
Yeah, I would, if I could add to Patty's comment about the other problem, you know, and we didn't foresee it at the time, frankly, but the other problem with using it for party events, and I've heard people say very high up in our party, well, at least we should be able to use it for party stuff. The problem with that is that even if we can pull it off more smoothly, and that's a hypothetical, it undercuts our ability to argue against it for public use in the general election. And we're seeing that now. You know, it looks a lot like a for me, but not for thee situation. Mm-hmm. And that is hard to defend. So I would just add that. I agree with Patty's comments. I would just add that to the party piece of it.
And frankly, Ken, I think that when we elect our party leaders, it's just as important as nominating public candidates for office. In fact, maybe it's more important. Party leadership has been a huge problem we've had. I mean, start at the RNC and go down from there. So what we do to elect our party leadership is absolutely critical. I completely disagree. And Chairman Anderson has mentioned that that he would favor it for party elections, but I'm completely on the other side of that.
Yeah.
Let's jump over, because one of the concerns about the legislation that's brought forward this year was that congressional races, the presidential primaries were being included. So once I contacted Patty, I asked her, were you made aware of this piece of legislation, which would impact certainly how the party operates? And then I contacted Bob Good and I said, are you aware of this legislation? Of course he was not. And he got on the phone and got with the rest of the congressional delegation, and not a single congressman in Virginia said, what's ranked choice and what's going on? There was like a big fat no. And so the concern with that piece of legislation was that there are offices well above the state level that were going to be seriously impacted by passing this legislation with no discussion with the candidates or the sitting congressman that we have. So I think that was a real perhaps big mistake. So Clarabelle, let's sort of go over to you. Okay, so voters go out, they've got all these candidates on the ballot, they do their best to figure out what it is, and then all those ballots have to be either tabulated by hand, as Patty said, or they've got to be run through a tabulator. So talk a little bit about the convention and the tabulation that you all went through, and then is Virginia prepared with the machines, the software, to actually run races in the localities? So can you speak to those two issues?
You're muted.
That way you didn't hear all the things that I was saying under my breath. Thank you. Let's go in reverse order. Is Virginia's voting system ready? No. There's only one locality, Arlington, in the entire state, to my knowledge, who has the algorithms, the software loaded into their tabulators, their optical scan machines, in order to count a ranked choice ballot. Arlington has it because Arlington ran a pilot study several years ago. Nobody else has got it. The best estimate from the 4 vendors, and Mr. Attorney General, you asked the right question before we started. Where's the money? Follow the money. The money goes to the vendors. The vendors want to sell you equipment. That's how they make money. And in Virginia, we have 4 licensed certified vendors of ballot counting machines. And they all want ranked choice because then they get to put more software that only they can do because it's proprietary software on their proprietary machines so that we can count ranked choice. The estimated cost per locality, and it varies from a small locality to a large locality, but the minimum amount is $15,000 per locality, got to be put on every machine, and then the vendors charge a yearly user's fee of something like $1,000, $1,500 a year per locality. So vendors like this, because they sold you the machines, how are they going to make money? You got the machine. They can sell you a service contract to come and change the oil. They don't change oil in machines, but they clean it up and spiff it up every year. So they service the machines. Now they get to load the software. And most localities don't have a whit knowledge of how that software operates. Certainly the voting public doesn't know how it operates. Okay, so that's we are not ready. We can't get ready by November. I mean, you all saw how extraordinarily effective and organized same-day registration and voting was. Total chaos.
As predicted.
As predicted. As predicted. I mean, how many times did we hear Nancy Smith say, back up the truck? How many people are going to walk in and back up the truck? And by golly, it happened. Mm-hmm. So that was, we weren't ready and we rolled it out. We're not ready and it'll be crazy. Remember, go back in your not so far way back machine when Virginia had touchscreen DRE voting machines. All you had to do was walk in, push. Some people didn't even check to see that the push showed the right ballot. They just said cast ballot. So they didn't know who they voted for. Then we went to all paper ballots. And having personally counted, been on an electoral board, looked at the ballots, all you have to do to vote is fill in the little circle. That's all you have to do. Don't do anything else. Just fill in the little circle or the little oval and put your ballot in the machine. And we have a really hard time getting people to understand how to do that. They put X's through, they circle the name, they turn the paper upside down. It just, okay. And so now you've got a general population that you are going to try to educate to mark the candidates according to whether they want the first candidate or the 7th candidate. Now, the Republican Party used this, as Patty elaborated and explained, to do ranked choice for basically 3 candidates: governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general. I saw the ballots. I was in the counting room. I was there to try to help the counters, and this was all done by hand, as she said, know how to count the ballots. The Republican Party of Virginia paid the national parliamentary expert on how to count ranked choice ballots to come to Richmond and explain to these, I don't know, 300 people counting ballots, 3 ballrooms downtown Richmond. And she came down from her podium after every round to explain, okay, now this is what you do on the next round. Pay no attention to what you did on the first round. This is what you do on the second round. And you're standing there looking at these reasonably intelligent, I mean, they've been through this, they've been through the training. They had all their candidates come tell them exactly how to vote their ranked choice ballots. I mean, 36,000 Republicans got hands-on training from the candidates saying, this is how you get me elected in a ranked choice ballot. And now you've got these people in there counting, and it's deer in the headlights. What'd she say? What'd she say? Is this what we're supposed to do? And so you're walking around the room watching these people count ballots, and you go, "Oop, that lady doesn't know what she's doing. Oop, that guy doesn't know what. Oop, let's go. Oop, let's talk about that." Granted, that's a hand count. but it was very confusing. And when you looked at the ballots, you could tell that the people voting didn't have a clue what they were doing.
Yeah.
They just didn't understand. And this was a full court press, Mr. Basketball, Attorney General. This was full court press of 7 candidates running around talking to people who signed up to be delegates. This is how you vote a ranked choice ballot for the candidate that you want. And they still didn't understand. So we're not ready.
So Claire Bell, thank you. I'm going to hop over here and I'm going to put on my campaign hat and ask the Attorney General a couple questions. 45 days of early voting seems incompatible with a ranked choice method. It is hard enough. It's hard enough, and you've been in more than a few campaigns. It is hard enough for your campaign to be ready to have voters turned out on election day, much less 45 days ahead. So every campaign manager, every campaign consultant who is desperately working to make sure their candidate is known by their potential constituents, by the voters, to be able to walk in and cast a ballot. Many of them can't. It's very expensive to run races in Virginia. So you're working against the clock to make sure your candidate is known so that when people see that ballot, they know that name. Ranked choice puts the voters in a really compromising position because there are some campaigns who, the minute that 45-day clock starts, they want the voters in there casting absentee ballots. I totally understand that. We are now in a situation where we need people to vote early. So how can you possibly have candidates ready, campaigns ready, 45 days ahead of time, the public aware to go in and vote? TV ads don't typically start 45 days ahead of time. So I think this is a real dilemma for candidates, for the people working for them, and for all of us who care about making sure the candidates are able to inform voters. So speak a little bit to that, if you would.
Yeah, and for the government side, it is the local government that will bear the cost of educating voters and of the software changes that Clarabelle talked about. That's all on the local governments. But as a candidate, you want to get your folks voting correctly for you, just like we talked through with the governor, lieutenant governor, AG races in 2021. And we, in my local races, I mean, I was a state senator in Fairfax. So as conservative as I am, I was covered by the Endangered Species Act. I needed every vote I could get. And so we did a very aggressive absentee voter campaign and so forth, which was the equivalent of an early voting campaign today. And with the exception of one race where I had an exact tie, I won all of those. And none of the Republicans around me did. None. And that's part of why the left wants all this messiness. They're better at this. They also like to get races within the margin of litigation. They have been out litigating us for 18 years. I will say this, we have closed the gap a good bit since 2020 on the litigation front, but we have not closed the gap. And when you create a mess like this, you're effectively throwing it into the courts, and candidates facing this kind of a race only have so many dollars. So how much do you spend telling people what you believe and what you'll do? And how much do you spend literally teaching them the mechanics of voting, which seems like something you might do with a first grader, right? Except, I mean, Clarabelle's description of 300 hardcore, partisan, politically engaged, intelligent Republicans scratching their heads at the instructions of how to count, and let's face it, a small election. A small election, 36,000 votes is less than one state Senate district in most years. That's what that is. And so we're building a problem in with ranked choice voting, and it makes things a lot harder for candidates. Now, as I said, the 45-day election season is all part of the left's strategy to turn this all into a big mess. And I would say, for people like me who think early voting is a bad idea, of course, people who can't make it on election day should have options, but that's really it. It makes it harder to secure things. It makes it harder to observe and make sure that the rules are being followed, and thus to have the confidence in the outcome that I believe Patty talked about earlier. I agree with wholeheartedly. And the Election Transparency Initiative, that's our gold standard. Do you have a system where the losing side, while unhappy, can accept the outcome because they could see everything end to end, see that it all ran by the rules, and see that everybody that qualified, and only those who qualified, got to vote? And unfortunately, in the 2 years the Democrats had control, they created a system that was a whole lot messier than that. And frankly, as Glenn Youngkin said when he was running, I don't like these rules, but these are the rules, and we got to win by these rules. And it changes what a candidate has to do, to your point, Nancy. It does complicate what is already, frankly, chaos management in running a campaign on what inevitably, relative to the communication required, is a low budget.
Precisely. Let's use a few terms here that I have read about in articles. There are people who have called ranked choice voting voter suppression, voter disenfranchisement. And interestingly, the NAACP does not support ranked choice. I think that there are people in the Black community who understand that this is detrimental to voters who may not always vote on the political right, but that is detrimental. So Patty or Ken, either one of you want to bite on the suppression part? And
I'll touch on it because I have to deal with it every day as part of the narrative. I mean, this is part of the go-to from the left. It is interesting to see there are sincere people on the left who want voting to happen correctly. Interestingly, when they bring their solutions to political people on the left, the political people on the left say, we don't want that. And then all of a sudden, the sincere, honest, idealistic people learn that their friends and allies actually want a messy system. For many in the NAACP, leadership, local leadership, for instance, all over the country, they find the voter confusion very, very frustrating. And they conclude that that suppresses the vote of their constituents, their membership constituents, thus the voter suppression complaint. Now, to me, voter suppression implies a level of intent, but I'm pretty used to hearing the left complain about results that achieve the same outcomes without the intent. And you don't need to intend to suppress votes to end up doing that using ranked choice voting. And that is where that NAACP split comes from. The real political partisans in the NAACP support it. The people who in the NAACP who are leaders in there, like the NAACP 100 years ago, who are trying to advance the cause of colored people, to use their name, they see the problem. It's those people who don't like ranked choice voting. They don't have as big a megaphone, I would point out, as some of the others. But you can see this repeated across the spectrum, left to right, and it is a serious problem.
Patty, do you want to add some comments there?
I absolutely do. I want to add another aspect to this in terms of disenfranchisement or suppression. One of the things that we talked about, and I'm one of 8 members of the resolutions committee at the RNC, where we passed a strong resolution against ranked choice voting. One of the things we talked about is that usually in elections, voters will, ideally, they listen to what all the candidates say, and they rally around one candidate. They have a candidate that they like, who they want to win, and they campaign for them and they work for them, and that's who they want to vote for. Well, ranked choice voting requires them to vote for candidates that they do not want to vote for. Personally, I will not vote for a pro-abortion candidate. Ranked choice voting, if I have to rank everybody in order for my vote to count, I've got to vote for pro-abortion candidates if that's one of the people I have to rank. I mean, it is really a violation. That's a violation of the franchise, requiring voters to just, okay, put a number by all the people. And Ken raised earlier the Lisa Murkowski issue. Ranked choice voting is for candidates who cannot win the popular vote, for candidates that the general electorate do not want. And the only way they can get in there is to have second, third, and fourth choice votes count. And I would make more of an argument on that. Why are you forcing people to vote for all these different people? If you're at a convention, you're at least making a choice each time on who's on the ballot.
Yep.
You can decide in a given round not to vote if you want, but in this situation, you're not.
Thank you. And yes, at a convention, many of us have been to a convention, those candidates get back up on the podium and they make their case all over again. So you're talking a live situation where if my favorite candidate didn't make it, I'm going to make my choice then based on that candidate, their ability to appeal to me for my vote. So there's, that kind of interaction with the candidate, with your people that you're with, saying, where are we going to go now? Who do we want to vote for? So it's a very interactive process, and it's so totally different from a piece of paper where, yes, the fourth candidate may be someone you would never, ever vote for. Clarabelle, so talk a little bit about when you have a
Hey,
ballot.
Nancy, before we leave that, can I just make one constitutional comment?
Please.
The description Patty walked through raises the constitutional question of over 50 years ago, now over 60 years ago, we went to one person, one vote. That was found to be a constitutional requirement. Well, ranked choice voting appears to abandon that.
Yeah.
So in round 2, if I voted for the number 3 candidate, I get a second vote. If you voted for candidates 1 or 2, you don't get a second vote. Does that violate the constitutional principle of one person, one vote? It seems rather obvious to me that it does. That has not been court tested yet. I think to have it court tested will require a losing candidate who would have otherwise won to challenge it, but that is inevitable statistically. I mean, there have already been so many errors with ranked choice voting. They just swore in school board members in California who they figured out later didn't actually win because they couldn't pull off the ranked choice voting correctly.
So there are no lawsuits or ones that are significant enough to challenge the constitutionality. Is that right?
Not yet.
Well,
That it's inevitable. That's coming.
Okay. So Clarabelle, talk about what happens when the candidate does not get chosen by the voter at all. Then what happens to that ballot? And talk about what's called ballot exhaustion, if you would.
Exactly. It's horrible to think that your vote, your ballot gets tossed. But that's exactly what happens. When you have, of course it's going to come from the Attorney General. One vote, one person. I just wrote it down to make sure I said it. And you got in there and gave all the law. If you vote on a ranked choice ballot and you don't rank everyone, all of them, all the voters, to Patty's point, you have to vote for somebody you may not even be able to hold your nose and vote for. You don't want to vote for them. But if you don't mark that person to get them in the rotation, then your ballot won't have maybe you've got 7 candidates and you voted 1 through 5. Well, when it flips to the next round, you don't have anybody to put into the next round. So your ballot keeps going and going, and pretty soon you don't have a ballot. Your ballot has been disallowed somewhere back in the order, and you don't know who that is. This forces you, the voter, almost 6 million registered voters in Virginia, to know everything you need to know about all the candidates. whether you like them or not, whether you would never vote for them or not. You have to vote for them in order to keep your number one guy still getting ballots in the second, third, fourth, whatever it is round. Because otherwise, your entire ballot will be discarded. Thus the term ballot exhaustion. And that's not fair. In the gubernatorial ranked choice unassembled convention, Glenn Youngkin won every round. There were 7 candidates, and he was ahead in every round. So if you just had a vote once and be done,
Yeah.
he still would have won.
Yeah.
So the left and the people who support ranked choice voting keep saying, yeah, but we got Governor Youngkin. We'd have gotten Governor Youngkin anyway, or at least candidate Youngkin. So don't use that argument, because it's, you want to have the ability to vote. And with ranked choice, your ballot may be discarded.
Yep, and I think there was a desperation to get back in the red column, or at least pink. And so attributing the win to ranked choice is now, I think it's really all over Virginia. That is how Republicans won. So it's a sort of a dangerous precedent to think that that is the reason.
Frankly, if I were Glenn Youngkin, and Winsome Sears and Jason Miyares, I'd be a little offended by that.
Amen.
There you go.
Amen.
They won because they were better than their opponents, and the people of Virginia agreed with that.
That's right. Stellar campaigns and stellar candidates. So, all right, I'm going to just read something from the code, and then we're going to take some questions. We've got some good questions in there, but and I'm not a lecture law attorney, and I don't know the code like Clarabelle, who knows it inside and out. But the law that was passed that introduced ranked choice voting into Virginia sounds a little vague in terms of how the decision is made, even at the local level, which is all that's allowed right now. The decision to conduct an election by ranked choice voting shall be made in consultation with the local electoral board and general registrar by a majority vote of the board of supervisors or city council. So it's sort of, it looks like a sort of a, let's toss the ball around and decide who actually has some authority to say, we're going to do this. Now, ultimately, board of supervisors or city council members make the ultimate decision. But I think it's saying in consultation with the local electoral board of the general registrar is sort of risky language. What say you, councilors?
I can address that pretty quickly. I mean, so long as they talk to them at all, they will fulfill the in consultation. It's possible they could even do it after voting, believe it or not, because what matters is where the power resides. Although what I find most interesting is you could have local boards of supervisors deciding how the school board members are going to get elected, and they could experiment on their school board members.
Gee, what a mess that will be.
There you go. Risky.
So Nancy, you've brought up the right question. It's and the Attorney General said exactly the right thing. In consultation does not require the local governing body to adhere or follow the consultation or advice. You may have a great electoral board and a great registrar who says, not a chance, we can't afford it, it's a mess, don't do it. And the board of supervisors or the city council will say, we don't care what you say.
Yeah, I think there's potential for conflict.
Oh, there definitely is.
Who gets to decide what, and is there agreement that this is how a local election should be run? So let's take a few questions before we close out. We've got about 6 minutes, and I will try and do a couple. Rodney Wine, our friend up in Frederick County, as the total number of votes in ranked choice equals the number of voters times the number of candidates, have Republicans run gaming theories against ranked choice outcomes? So the gaming strategy has been a topic of conversation in some of these, that it becomes a playing the odds. So comment on that. Whoever thinks they want to take that on.
You can't play it because you don't know how people, I mean, I'm not a gambling woman. I work too hard but to throw away my money on something I don't control. And to the Attorney General's point, the left is trying to control the chaos by making it more chaotic so they can control the outcome.
Yeah.
You don't know how people are going to vote in a ranked choice. You don't know whether they understand the system. And that was my point about looking at the Republican convention ballots. You would think these people would have been carefully taught how to mark their ballot, and yet they weren't, or they didn't remember. The left is very good at giving people sample ballots, and the little sample ballots walk in and mark it just exactly how their sample ballot's told. Conservatives and people on the right, are not so much sheep. They kind of say, I know what I want to vote for. So I don't think you can use the gaming method other than to say it may not work.
Yeah, and people do try to overthink it, and an already complicated system already gets a lot more difficult. You can trip yourself up. I think the concern from Frederick County is real because some people do that. I'm not denying that it happens. I'm just suggesting that it unwisely even further complicates what is currently the most complicated form of voting in America.
Yep.
Does a candidate keep the votes they get each round?
They keep first round votes. And then it's the lower round voters voters for lower round candidates who get lesser votes. When you said at the beginning, Nancy, they peel off. To put it in alternative language, if there's only 3 candidates, none of the 3 get over 50%, the number 3 drops for the second round of voting. And whichever of their voters made a second choice, they may not have made a second choice, but those that do, those votes get put in the column of the remaining 2, whichever one of the remaining 2 candidates. So you have a dynamic where it isn't just who do those voters want as their second choice, but who among them even voted.
That's right.
When they've already been to the voting booth.
That's right.
Go back.
That's right.
How about going to the voting booth and not voting? And some of them who are confused, they check one box. And if their candidate isn't among the last standing, they effectively don't vote.
That's right.
Right.
We have a good statement here from someone who's on the Fairfax County Board of Elections. Ranked choice voting for general elections as opposed to primaries would be extremely complicated here in Virginia's largest jurisdiction.
Oh my gosh.
The legislature has already made the process so complicated that many citizens suspect that it is intentionally not non-transparent. RCV will compound public distrust of the process. Wise words from
So yeah, I used to be in Fairfax. I ran in Fairfax. I'll use the numbers when I ran 15 years ago. There is 1 year of the election cycle with 54 offices on the ballot somewhere in Fairfax County. Can you imagine? This isn't, 6,000 people in a county. That's a precinct in Fairfax County. And they don't always track the votes by precinct. Can you imagine this with centralized voting locations, which we use for early voting? We don't use the precincts. They've got to divide them all out into the precincts because of who's running there. Talk about a nightmare. So for non-Fairfaxians, the bigger the locality, the more complex this is. And I would suggest that that is a geometric function, not a linear function. It is going to get much worse. It doesn't get twice as bad if your county's twice as big. It gets 4 times worse.
Mm-hmm. I would add also that we're looking at the fundamental fairness and constitutionality of this process of ranked choice voting. If ranked choice voting is unfair and wrong and slanted and possibly unconstitutional in general elections than it is for primaries. It is in party elections. It is for dog catcher. It is for board of supervisors. And in
Amen.
fact, what they're doing, they're trying to put the frog in the cold water and then turn the heat up to make us think that those local elections, oh, they're not that important. We can do ranked choice here. No, they are everything. Those school board elections, they're everything. And this is a bid to take the fairness and reliability out of those critical, close to the citizen elections.
Yep, absolutely. Sorry, Bill.
Again, just real quick, what the Attorney General just said. As you all know, the General Assembly last year passed a law that says all voting must be reported by precinct. So you have to know who won in precinct 1, you have to know all the ballots. Well, that's okay when you've got formal voting the way we do now. You just add them all up. You know, precinct 1 plus precinct 2 plus precinct 3, and in Fairfax, 264, I think it is now, precincts. Well, how do you do that with ranked choice? Do you do the summary in that precinct? Or do you take all the precincts that vote for school board in that magisterial district? I mean, what do you do? There's nothing in the code. There's nothing, I mean, it's a mess.
I'm gonna take the last statement here from Doc Troxel. Many of us know Doc in Lynchburg on the electoral board. People want to know on election night who won.
Yeah.
Ranked choice voting wipes that out. In 2021, it took almost 3 days to count the ranked choice ballots and figure out who the Republican nominees for governor, lieutenant governor, and attorney general. And that was all done in a single location. How long would it take to find out who wins a statewide office in a general election, especially with huge concern about election integrity and absentee ballots? And then secondly, counting them precinct by precinct won't work because election officers won't know who to drop from their count until all precincts have reported their votes. Then they have to go back and count each precinct again after they know who to drop from the count, the next round of counting. And just reading that from Dr. Troxel, I'm lost. So.
And there's even another consideration, and that is in any race that only might require going to a second round of balloting, you can't even look at it until the end of the day, Friday after election day, because in Virginia, ballots keep coming in until noon on Friday. And so if you need a second round, you can't run it until you get all the ballots in. So we won't even effectively begin counting races in the close races with more than just 2 candidates until Friday. We won't even start counting them.
And you may not start on Friday because you've got provisional ballots.
Yep.
That you have to adjudicate.
Yes.
Yeah.
And look, I with the Election Transparency Initiative, I deal with elections all over the country, and I'm a big believer in getting it right, not getting it fast. But I mean, come on, gaps in time are where the paranoia explodes all across the spectrum. Nobody owns that. We're all just humans. That's just human nature. And we've seen that year after year, race after race, and injecting this kind of delay, which is what they're doing. Adopting ranked choice injects delay into the process, and very substantial delay. I mean, the New York City mayoral, the Democrat race for mayor, they took, I want to say 10 days to count for one office. And, people up there were going nuts.
But they didn't get a final vote for over 2 months.
Right.
A couple of other comments. Well, for one thing, ballot custody.
Yeah.
Hello, ballot custody is still a raging issue. Okay. Think Maricopa County. And how would you even begin to cure those ballots? The curing process, I can't even imagine what it would take to cure a ballot. So, okay, as we close out, I want to just ask a couple more things. I understand that there are a couple of states that have now banned, gone through the legislature and basically banned it. I think Tennessee maybe So Attorney General, do you know the states that have? I think there are a couple of that.
I can't list them all, but not only are there several, that's a growing list.
Yeah.
And by the way, in Alaska, where they went and made this available and started using it in 2020, they're so disenchanted with it already that there is already a move to get rid of it.
Yeah.
Now, when you're fighting the Murkowski political machine in Alaska, that can be difficult. But where this has been used, it hasn't run smoothly. There isn't customer satisfaction going on with ranked choice voting around the country. And part of the reason I think people were rushing all the other offices in Virginia is so they can get it done before the screw ups start to roll in on the kind of scale like they just had in California. Literally, the last few weeks, they swore in school board members who they now know didn't win the race by ranked choice voting rules, but they were certified in the time frame of their law requires, and now nobody knows what to do. How do you get rid of a school board member who was properly certified in terms of timeline, but they got it wrong, and they don't even know. They don't even know what to do with that. Couldn't happen to a better state.
It seems like there's a lot of work out there for attorneys, just saying.
Oh yeah.
If they start to people start to get serious about how they got.
Well, what we said earlier, Nancy, the left wants litigation.
That's right.
They're willing to fight over this stuff because they know they have a competitive advantage.
That's right.
Thank you, George Soros.
We've got Mark Elias is always in the wings waiting. So, Patty, I'm going to ask you to close out here about the resolution that the RNC passed. What should we all be doing as Republicans, conservatives, activists, and even if they're Democrats who think that this is a problem? What should everyone be doing?
Everyone should be educating other people on this issue and making it clear to them. Our grassroots, this really disempowers the grassroots. It disempowers the educated, sincere, average voter. And so I think we need to be communicating to other people that this is our power. Our power and our numbers it's in our vote. I'll tell you right now, we were just at the RNC in California, and there was zero grassroots support for the reelection of Ronna McDaniel. Zero. And in fact, that she united the party. She united the whole party against her reelection, except the 168 of us who had a vote in the process, and 2/3 of them voted for her. The grassroots were cut out of the process. The 111 people who voted for her said to the grassroots, I don't care about you. You don't matter. Shut up. So ranked choice voting is another way to tell the grassroots and conservatives, we don't care how popular you are. We're going to shut you up by putting in a different system so our unpopular candidates who stand for nothing can win. So we need to fight it tooth and nail.
Thank you. 2024, certainly the folks who are in favor of it and the groups that are now starting to become pretty vocal and make their way around the state are saying that their plan is to have ranked choice voting in Virginia in 2024. What happens in 2024? We're all heading towards electing the next president. So there is a deadline. This is not it might take us 5, 10, 15 years. The goal is to go through this year and next year and be ready to use ranked choice. So we have our work cut out for us. So any last minute comments? Otherwise, I know we're a little bit over and we've had a great audience, and actually people have really stuck with us tonight. So we will be talking about ranked choice again. This is not going to go away. And we have, as Patty said, we have to have a lot of grassroots out there talking to folks, talking to their boards of supervisors and city councilors. I think in many cases may not know that really the camel's nose under the tent is starting with them. Maybe unaware, thinking, well, it's okay at the local level. It's not going to really create.
No, it's not.
So I think we all know what this is meant to do. So lots of work to do. Any last minute comments? And I thank all of you so much for taking your time tonight and being with us.
Thank you.
Thanks for doing this, Nancy.
Thank you, Nancy.
Absolutely. Appreciate it. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight and have a good evening.